Okay, we're going to continue this topic about JSON C++ programming. So last time I showed this example and its JSON representation. Just to let you know that this slide is representing with a nice user interface, kind of, showing you how somebody provides a post. And then to allow people to make a comment, people to provide a reaction to that. So that's basically, you can think about that is either a Twitter or a Facebook kind of situation where people can provide this kind of social interaction. And just show you that this is exactly the same representation in JSON is on this slide. So those two, if you match, they're one-to-one. Okay, and in fact, this one is already included in your homework number 5, reference implementation. And you can see that this is just a very compact, but it's very expressive way of representing any kind of object and structure. So hopefully from last lecture and including this lecture, I'd like you to learn 2 things. Number 1, you should learn how to use this representation language called JSON to represent any object. So if you have an object, if you have a model, remember we talked about object-oriented programming has 2 parts. One is a software engineering part, the other part is a modeling part. We try to model the real world. So we're going to, again, look at these 2 goals. The first goal is, how do you actually use this to represent a very complicated situation? In fact, if you've done this exercise, you actually pretty much knows all the possibility for you to represent pretty much anything in the whole world. As people are using this in web, people are using this in system management. In fact, Saturday, I had a meeting with somebody from Southern California who is actually doing network management research. He's one of the top guys in this area. I asked him, well, when I did my PhD thesis, it was a very old representation called SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol. So I asked, what's this thing? I haven't followed up for a long time. I said, what's the representation people now try to manage the internet or manage any device? And he said, well, we're using JSON as a representation. So you can think about, this has been so universally applicable to a lot of situations. And that's number 1. Just use JSON to represent the object, represent the world you try to represent. And the second part, which I want you to learn, is that, well, okay, I have a representation. So how do you actually use a programming language? The JSON itself, by the way, is not a programming language. It's a representation. It's a notation. But now we're using a programming language called C++. How do we actually program? Means that we can manage, we can create, we can interpret, we can extract information from a JSON, which is from the world. If you learn this, you will realize exactly the same interface is actually applicable if you use Python or Java. So later you're using other programming language, the way you interact with JSON is pretty much the same. All right. Okay, so now we're going to, oh, sorry, I shouldn't touch my pocket. Okay. So I'm going to show you, I mean, if I directly hit on the whole thing, it might be too big. I want to actually looking at something pretty small. So let's actually look at this part. This part, let me see. This part, in fact, is 1 comment. One of the comments. So you remember that this one has 1 post and 2 comments. And the second comment is by Peter on this date. And so I basically take that particular part out. So you can see that it's also a JSON. So JSON is almost like, this is an object called comment object, then this object is essentially embedded in a bigger object called post object. So you can see this kind of composition of object by a composition of JSON. Put together, you can have that. But let's actually look at this. This is already pretty complicated. This is a comment. But remember, the comment has what? Has a comment itself, has the author of the comment, but also have people's reaction to that. There are two reactions, if you remember. Now I hope this lecture, you remember this picture. That this picture shows the one in the middle, that was the comment object I just extract out. And this comment, let's actually just look at this picture and see what information needs to be represented in JSON. So I have a comment, I have from, means that who is the author who actually provided this comment, and we have a timestamp, and then you have a message for that comment. And then this is important, you have a two reaction. One reaction is love, one reaction is angry. And the reaction of love was provided by another person, also named Peter, it's probably the same person. And then the angry is actually reaction provided by another user called Oracle. So all this information need to be somewhat. Let's actually look at what is the JSON looks like. So let's actually go through this very quickly once, and then we try to see how you can actually write a program. And the most important thing, I'm going to write a program today to do what we call DumbJ. DumbJ is essentially how do I actually transform a JSON looks like this? Oh, sorry, the other way. How do I actually represent an object-oriented world, represent comment, reaction, and author, and then produce a JSON object looks like this. So today we're going to do DumbJ. DumbJ is from C++ or Python to JSON. And homework 6, you're going to do JDump, which is from JSON, you're going to go in. Okay, in my opinion, to be honest, DumbJ is a lot easier than JDump. JDump, well, I shouldn't say a lot easier. They're similar, but you will see that. I think it's probably better to do DumbJ first. So let's look at this very carefully, the object. The object first has ID. The comment has ID. Remember I said there is a 3 portion of the number that this is just a notation. I mean, this notation, in fact, was used by, it is probably still used by Facebook. It's essentially have a 3 portion. The first portion represents the page ID. The second portion represents the post ID. The third portion represents the comment ID. So if you think about any comment should have this 3 portions. Which page? This page could be a Facebook fan page for ecs36b, and there's a post by Professor Wu or by any of the students, any of the member, and then people leaving a comment, then that comment should have a unique ID. So essentially we need an identifier to be able to uniquely refer whatever we have in that social interaction. So that's just the ID part. Okay, so now there is a from part. I want to actually first look at the from part a little bit more carefully before I go to the rest. So from means it's the author who actually provide that comment. So now let's look at the from. So remember JSON is key value pair. I'm going to ask you the question. From is the key. Value is whatever after that double quote from and a colon, whatever that portion is. Can someone tell me, based on you learned so far about JSON, what is the value type of that key value pair, that particular key value pair? I'm actually talking about this particular key value pair here. What is the type? Yes, it's an object. That's good. That's the answer. Because let's say, what is the possible type of JSON? Let me go back to my slide. Just remember that. So you can see that the JSON, the key must be a double quote string. That's the key. Key is always string. No other way you can represent. But the value, the key value here, the value could be what? The value could be either a basic type such as a string, Boolean value, integer, double, or null, or array. Those are the possible basic type, but there is another one, or it's an object. Okay, it could be an object. Object, usually in JSON, the object, the class for object is JSON colon value. So when you actually include JSON CPP library, or you include, some of you using Ubuntu, you have to include in a different location because you already include those five. By the way, JSON has a C++ classes defined. It's not just one, there's a bunch of them. They are all under JSON, just like std colon. Now it's called JSON colon. Value is an object. So whenever you see JSON colon value, it's an object. Well, this is our good friend. We're going to use that a lot, okay, today and for the rest of the quarter. Okay, so this is an object. Okay, so now I'm actually going to ask you a further question. So I'm still looking at this part so this is the object. Okay, the other thing important. How do I actually know it's an object in JSON? If you see a pair of curly bracket, it's an object. The other way to look at it, it's a curly bracket, a pair of curly bracket is an object. Okay, so without telling you anything, can somebody guess what kind of object is this one? After that what kind of object is this one? Yes. It's user object close, but I'm actually referring to one of the objects you already developed in homework maybe 1, 2, and 3. It's a person. See, this is a person object. Essentially is your homework assignment number 2. So your person object has so many things, right? But I only include this 2. By the way, you probably noticed that object-oriented, even though we give a lot of attribute, but we actually don't fill in all the value. We only fill in the value we need. JSON is the same thing. I actually include 2. I didn't include hometown. I didn't include other GPS location. But those 2 are the most essential. If that's only relevant to my application, I can actually put that JSON string with this 2 thing into what? Into a C++ object. That's actually has those 2 attributes being set by those 2 values. One is name is Peter, avatar name, that's Peter, and VSID is whatever VSID string. So that can be, you can now imagine that can be converted to a person. Okay, so that's one example. Any question? Everybody with me so far? I'm actually showing you how to represent a person object in JSON and how to recognize an object that's what kind of class in this JSON format. Let's actually, I give you another challenge. Find another person object in this purple area. Can you see any other object in the purple area? There is person object, but I just realized when I look at this JSON actually has some problem. This JSON has some problem. The representation is actually wrong. Because let me actually tell you why is a problem. Let me quit this one and highlight. Remember, reaction must be provided also by a person, right? So there should be a person object for each of the reaction. And I know this comment has two reactions, right? Remember here, we have two reactions. One is Peter, one is Oracle. So they should have the other two. And I just realized that, let me tell you where it is. Reaction, you see the first one is avatar name, Peter, VSID, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then you have the other one, which is Oracle. And let me tell you that I think this need to be changed to be consistent with the model. I thought I already changed that, but apparently this slides, I haven't changed that. So I'm going to change this side. What I'm going to do is that if I have a reaction, here is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a from. I will only change one, and then you will see what I did here. I'm going to highlight it with a different color. Let me choose red. I like red. Okay, I want you to contrast this two, the old version and the new version. If you will show up. Okay, so this is the new version. Oh, I make it too red, too much red. Let me change that. My computer, for some reason, is quite slow today. No, here. I do not want this to be red. I want this to be purple. Okay, now I'm happy. Okay, the red part, highlight in the middle, is the new version I just made. Let's compare for the previous version. The previous version looks like this. It essentially say data, then say avatar, Peter, VSID, and then type. And what I did here is that I actually put a new key value pair called from, and then put those two inside another object. And then I have type, I have created time. So essentially, this is a reaction. This provides this information is that what type of reaction we have. Is it love? Is it angry? And the second thing is that when was that reaction was introduced? I have a timestamp, and then I want to know who, as a person, who provide that reaction. If you think about that, that is actually a very generic way for we represent a social media reaction to some content, okay? And the difference is that if I don't do this way, I'm actually duplicate myself because those four are not a person object. Only those first two represent the person object. So essentially the modeling is great for me to just represent a person object, a type, and a timestamp. Those three pieces of information instead of for me to represent that. Okay, so let's actually take a look at the code for reaction. I have a code for reaction somewhere. In a second. Oh, okay, let's use my, apparently I didn't put that in the slide, but let's look at the reaction because you should receive this for homework 5 already. Let me see, reaction.h. So now we can look at this is a C++ object for reaction. Now let's compare the piece of code of reaction I show you versus the C++ code. You can see that what I did here is a class reaction, and it has a type, which is the string That's the type of reaction. And I have a person, which is whatever. So you can call the from, you can the author. I call the author here. And then there's a timestamp, which is created, means that whenever it was created. And then I have this constructor for this reaction. And then I have a virtual function called dumpj. I haven't talked about dumpj yet, but just tell you how similar that you can see a one-to-one correspondence between a JSON representation of a reaction versus JSON representation, a C++ representation of exactly the same information. All right, so I'm actually going to give you an introduction, the simplest way. When we thought about how do I do dumpj or jdump, which basically converting between the C++ world and the JSON world. So essentially, we're doing this. For some reason, it's kind of so. So you can see that we actually create a bunch of classes over here. That's what our target. So you can see we have a core, we have a person, we have a post, we have a message, we have a comment, we have reaction. This is essentially everything we need. And then on the other side, that's actually our JSON representation. Basically, you can have the basic type string number, Boolean, null, array, and the object. That's everything we need to worry about. And how do we actually put these things together? So the first job I'm going to show you is the simplest one, is the person object. Well, how do I actually represent? Remember I said, oh, wait a minute. I need to represent this, and what I have is this red. So now I'm actually going to first to do the red part. I want to tell you how do I write a C++ program to be able to produce the red part. Because if you think about that, if I can actually produce that person, that's called dumpj in the person object, and I can represent a dumpj for reaction, and essentially it will recursively build up. By the way, you should listen to this fairly carefully. We use a lot of recursion in doing JSON because JSON is essentially a very, very flexible, powerful paradigm for representing information. But the trouble is, I actually don't know how deep it is. It could have multiple level of depths. Means that object contain object, object contain object. What's that? That's recursion. So essentially, we need to use a piece of code which understands matching with that recursion that can go into the whole depths about the whole JSON. So if you do JSON, any kind of JSON processing, you have to be careful. You have to think recursive. I know in the 36BA, you probably only heard about recursion. You never worked too much on any kind of real world situation. But now this is actually a perfect example of that, why recursion matters in the real world situation. Okay, so let's actually start with the bottom of the recursion. Means the simplest way, there's nothing below it. That's the person object, that's from, has only two key value pair, avatar name, and VS ID. How do I actually do that? So I'm going to show you first the example. I actually pulled it out already, I believe. I think this one may be already included in your reference implementation. So this should be in person.cpp. Let's look at person.h first. Okay, this is homework 5 person. It's similar. You can see that, okay, we still have GPSDD, but you can see that it's interesting. Now GPSDD has a dumpj. If you notice that it has a dumpj. basically every class has a dump J now, okay? So this is GPSDD has a dump J, IP address has a dump J. You can see here has a dump J, and then the person, of course, has a dump J. So this pretty much everything is the same, except I'm actually adding this dump J. And by the way, for homework, this is for homework 6, sorry. For homework 6, you're going to have J dump. So between dump J and J dump, you basically you have a two-way street. You can actually do whatever you want. But homework 5, we only look at dump J. Okay, that's person.h. You do have that function called dump J. So let's take a look at person.cpp, which I think I already gave you the code, but this is actually the dump J for GPSDD is already finished. And address, okay, now here is the program. I wanted to dump J. Use that person. You think of that, there's not too many lines of code. Not too many lines of code. Let's actually take a look, this dump J. I give you 15 seconds. I mean, it's just only maybe 4 or 5 lines of real code. There are some debugging lines, doesn't matter. But take a look at the code, see how much you understand. And then I will go through that one after the other. Okay, so let's go through this code line by line, and then I would like to invite you to ask any question you have. In fact, I would say if you understand this one and the second one, second scenario, which is reaction, you probably already know everything about JSON programming. So this one, the first thing you see that here, I'm actually create a JSON value. This is a return value. I'm going to return, means that inside of this function, I'm going to produce a JSON object. And that JSON object is essentially the copy, or represent exactly the same information as the C++ object that this JDOM is being implemented. So in this case, it's person. So I'm actually going to implement a JDOM for person object. So now you see that I'm actually using new. Now I'm not using static allocation. I'm using new, which is like a malloc. The reason I need to do that is that once you produce the memory, produce this JSON object. By the way, JSON column value represent that's a JSON object. So I have to make sure that when I create this new JSON object, it will not be removed after you exit this function. So essentially, if you want to make sure you create some object or memory location that's going to be last, even the function is returned, then you have to use either malloc or new. That's why we use new. If you use any other way, the memory will be gone. I mean, later when you learn like maybe programming language ECS 140 or ECS 150, you actually start to learn the memory region in your computer. There are certain regions is what we call on stack. There are certain regions what we call on the heap. There's anybody heard about stack and heap? Okay, so if I do malloc, do I get the memory from stack or do I get the memory from heap? Yes, that's very good. Yeah, whoever taught you that, that's a very good professor. So, I mean it's very important for C programmer. You have to know that heap is for malloc. It's a different area of memory. Stack is come and go. Whenever you call a function, the memory is on the stack. So in the operating system, there are 2 regions of memory. new, make sure that is on the heap, HEAP, and it will not go away unless you free it or delete it. Okay, very important. Okay, the first line here is I just create a JSON object called result pointer, and now you can see how elegant JSON programming is. Key value pair. How do I do key value pair? I actually do the first one is a star because it is a pointer. So the star result pointer and then put the bracket. Inside the bracket is my key. I just put a key there. The first key is avatar name. It's equal to this to the avatar name. That's the avatar name you have for your homework assignment number 2 and homework assignment number 3. And then the same thing, the next line, I'm actually doing VSID, this VSID. Having this 2 line, I'm already insert those 2 key value pair into the JSON object I'm going to return. That's it. And then what I do, return that pointer. You can see it's only 4 lines. First one, I create this object, dynamically allocation on the heap. Number 2, number 3, I actually insert those 2 attributes I care as a JSON object. And then I return the pointer. That's it. And okay, just let you know, there is a one thing which we use this a lot. Let me see if I can find the code very quickly. No, I actually already have this code somewhere. Okay, so this is the reaction. Now I'm actually doing the reaction part of the dump J. Okay, the reaction part of dump J. If you think about this, I have only 3 things. Again, I create, okay, this line here is essentially how do I call it? It's a debugging line. Okay, that line can be ignored. But again, I have this 3 sections. The first section is I actually create a return pointer because I am going to create an object. I'm going to return to the object to the whatever call me, and then I'm actually going to do the from, the type, and the created time. I have 3 from, type of reaction, and the created time. Those 3 attributes. So essentially, you see that I'm actually putting from, but this time, when I do from, I'm actually not putting the information. What I did is I say this author who wrote that reaction, and then dump J. So that dump J is going to call the code I just showed you about 5 minutes earlier to produce that person JSON. And then the type, I'm going to put whatever type, it's a love or angry, I'm going to put it here. And then this is a bit tricky, is that it will create a time and need to produce this nice string that the industry used to represent the time for any kind of time zone. And I actually provide you the source code for doing this get time string function that you can actually use. I'll explain to you later, but that you don't need to worry initially. But this is the same format. Create dynamically a JSON object on the heap. Shuffle the value into the key value pair. And then at the end, we just return this. Okay, but we actually clean some of the information because we no longer need those information. Okay, so that's the same paradigm for you to do this. But here is more complicated because it actually recursively, when I produce the reaction, I recursively need to produce to call a dump-j and a person object. So from a reaction object, I'm going to call a person object dump-j. But then in return the JSON object, I can just easily integrate it. And the result, essentially, I'm getting this part here. So now if you look at this, hopefully you have some feeling about what we're doing. Hold on. So now in the middle, we talk about reaction. So what is a reaction? A reaction is essentially, let me actually kill this one. So a reaction is essentially from here all the way to here. That's one reaction, what I marked. Let me actually just copy it to make sure that this is, you know what I'm talking about. New slide. All right. So this is one reaction. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Maybe let me make it separate line. Let me get rid of this one. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, I'll do it this way. Okay, this is essentially a reaction. We're just using the two pieces of code I showed you how this will be represented. The reaction has three attributes: from, type, and created time. But from itself is an object, so I have to call a dump-j at the person object level. It will produce the red part from the button. In fact, the red is only this particular red line. Okay, that's what we're doing with this two. Okay, before I move on, the next topic I'm going to talk about is array. Because I have actually teach you everything about JSON programming. Essentially, I talk about most of the JSON programming except array. Array is a little bit complicated. Any question at this moment for this simple example? Everything about JSON, but without array. When I ask you whether you have a question and you didn't say anything, that usually is too extreme, okay? Which means I explained perfectly clear, or I totally lost you. I just want to get a sense. Is everything okay? Should I move on? Right? Okay, good. All right. So now let's actually go back to the original picture. The original picture, you see that the reaction is not a single reaction. It is actually reactions. So essentially, we're talking about an array situation because there are multiple elements. That's actually because we have multiple reactions. And in fact, in JSON, it's interesting is that typically you dealing with C++ programming, you create an array, you have to specify how many elements at the maximum that you could have in an array. If you ever use array in C or C++, or maybe in Java as well, that you have to give a bound. You have to say how many elements that this array can, like at least maximum you can have, and you don't have to use all of them, but kind of they will allocate a big chunk of memory to actually support this array. In JSON, you have to be careful a little bit, is that it is an array, but we actually don't know how big it is in general. We just know whatever represent within that curly bracket. Now I'm actually looking at this. Go back here. See, I have this curly bracket here. Let me change the color again, because I really want to highlight this array. Okay, between this curly bracket and this curly bracket, there are two elements. The element I show you is one reaction, but there is a second reaction is also there. That's the starting from after the timestamp. This part is the second one. The second reaction should be the same format. I haven't changed the second part. Okay, so you can see that an array is some kind of object that between that curly bracket. The only way I know is through that middle comma. Here is how I know that this is the end of array and the other array, this comma here. Let me actually put that into green. So you can put multiple element, object, comment, object, comment, object, comment. By the way, it's the same thing when you actually perform homework assignment number 3. Homework assignment number 3, the JSON spec I gave you only have a one function. What you need to do, you need to have a 4 function. So it means that you have to actually copy that to 3 times and use comma. So then you have an array of 4 elements. If you look at that homework 3 spec JSON, it's actually an array of function that you can define. I only provide 1, but you can provide 4 of them for homework assignment number 3. Okay, so that's an array specification. Let's see how we can actually handle this array. I'm going to go through, let me see, reaction. Let me actually show you the code. I might have already code in the slide. I remember I talk about that a lot. Not this one. No, I think this is actually part of JDOM, not DUMJ. So I'm going to go to, if it's a reaction, I'm going to do comment. Now I'm going one level up to comments. Okay, I'm going up to the comments, and now I'm going to look at the DUMJ of comment. I move one level up from person to reaction. Now I'm going to comments. Okay, but first I have to look at comment.h to tell you where's the array was represent. So here, let me actually show you the comment.h, which is already provided to you. And inside the comment, where is the reaction? Comment. Here. You see this line here? This line is a C++ representation of an array of vector. So this is a template. There is a few templates that we will be using in doing C++ programming. The most commonly used template is probably vector. Essentially, in C++, we don't use array, we use vector, because vector has a lot of nice property that's actually help programmer to avoid a lot of mistakes we make as a C programmer. So let's actually first explain what is this looks like. Vector, this is basically say I'm actually an array, but the type of each of the element in the array is in between that smaller sign and greater than sign. Means that is actually an array of pointer to reactions. So essentially, I declare an array of reaction pointer. So that's why it's actually saying that's the type of the element in the array. Vector smaller than reaction start, and then greater than. That's basically say it's a pointer. Okay, and then I actually declare a variable which is also a pointer called reactions. And reactions is a pointer to such array. So that's the C++, maybe a little bit ugly, but that's our representation about an array of reaction. All right, so now we're going to see how we're going to, based on this reaction, now we're going to look at comment.cpp, the dumpj. Okay, again, we have this structure. We have the structure of, this is a comment, so we have to do result pointer. You see that this is exactly the same way. dumpj always create a pointer in this line, result pointer, and just create a Java object, so not Java object, JSON object, and the subsequent line will just push the key value pair into that. And the first thing we actually produce, this part, I'm actually going to be a little bit shaky because I actually need to provide the profile ID, post ID, and comment ID. That's a 3-portion ID I would talk about. Page ID, I call profile ID, and then post ID and the comment ID. We'll address that later. But what I want to tell you is the ID part is here, the front part is here, the message part is here. But the most important thing is adding the reaction part. This part I'm actually going to do the array. Let's actually take a look. How do I actually handle the array? So, okay, I actually need to did a lot of check because I have to check whether this reaction has any reaction. If it doesn't have any reaction, I shouldn't do that. That's kind of the check I have to do. But inside here is essentially this loop. This is how I actually deal with this. How do I deal with this? Is that now you can see that I actually iterate through each of the reaction object under the same comment. That's how I actually try to go through that. This is essentially for me to go through that reactions list. But here is the interesting part. I'm actually calling dumpj to this reaction to whatever the index and then the dumpj. Because I go through each of the reaction, I make the call, and then I have that pointer, which is the JSON object. So here's an array, very natural. I just say the JSON C reaction I, which is the index I provide, is equal to whatever the result I just got from the dumpj of that individual reaction. So essentially, if you follow this loop, is that I just go through a loop until I'm done. For every single reaction, I'm actually going to call the dumpj at the reaction level and shovel it into the reactions JSON. And at the end, I'm actually having this array called JSON C reaction. And I'm actually putting another key value pair called data. And I put another called count. And essentially, that's everything. I just return the result pointer, I'm done. So this is probably, for dumpj, this is probably the most complicated case because you need to deal with array to produce. Let's actually look at the PowerPoint slide. Just sorry, give me 1 minute, I'll be done. Let's come back to this array that we have. Okay, by the way, that's the array of 2 elements, Peter and Oracle. And those the array that we care about from here. You can see that's why it has a reactions, has data, which contain 2 elements. The first element is this part, and the second element is this. Let's go through that array twice, and I put a count of 2. And that particular code will actually generate a JSON representation. Okay, to summarize, I just want to, I know today may be a little bit dry. Hopefully when you start working on homework 5, you'll actually appreciate more, to learn more about this. It's essentially two things. Number one, how do I actually represent any complicated object using JSON? The second thing is that, well, how do I actually write a C++ program to convert a corresponding C++ object into the JSON representation? Okay, so I'm done here. Just wanted to let you know today, I'm directly going back to the academic search, the place we have office hour, and the office, whatever, the lab will be open until 1:30, and then I'll go to the discussion, okay?